This week on the BackTable podcast.
Because a specialty, if we really want to go down this clinical road, then we just got to make it be that and, focus on those folks. But without that kind of discussion and that understanding and going through the motions of looking things up yourself, you're never going to learn. There's no course you can go to. No one's just going to hand you things. Most courses you go to, no offense to the people who make courses, I'm not going to name names, getting one in trouble, but there's financial incentives for those things. The speakers are there because they have services to promote, right? And you pay them, you pay third parties for these services from a declining pot of money every single year. You don't need that. Just look it up yourself. You're smart enough to get here, figure it out. Just takes time, just takes effort. I can point folks in the right direction, but I think that link to the physician fee finder tool will be quite enlightening because most people don't know about that. Those are our tax dollars. Use them.
Now a quick word from our sponsor.
RADPAD was developed by physicians for physicians. Clinically proven radiation protection during cine and digital subtraction angiography. Don't bet your career or your health on anything less. Trust RADPAD radiation protection shields for all your fluoro-guided interventions. See radpad.com for more information and contact info@radpad.com for a free radiation evaluation and a no-brainer radiation protection cap. And don't forget to tell them that you heard about it on the BackTable podcast.
Welcome, everyone. This is your host, Subhash Gutti, current resident at Rush University Medical Center. And today I'm joined by our guests, Kavi Devulapalli and Chris Zarour. Welcome, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So today we're going to be discussing some hot topics, early career advice, and the job search. Before we jump into things, let's start out with some introductions. I'm lucky to call both of these guys my mentors, but just to remind our audience, Dr. Devulapalli, you've been on the podcast a few times. Briefly, how did you get to where you are today, and what are you doing in your current practice?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me today. It's great to be here. It's been a long, winding road. I kind of joke with people I'm kind of like a geriatric early career at this point. I think it's my 7th year out of training. So it's been a little bit, but I started off my career in North Carolina. I did my fellowship at UNC Chapel Hill, graduated in 2018. I took a job at basically a small community hospital, Durham Radiology. It was the group, Duke Regional Hospital. It's a good place, was there for a couple of years. And then I actually left to start an OBL with a cardiologist right as a pandemic was starting. So I was there for a little while. And then, kind of the way life turns out, being married to a vascular surgeon who was finishing training, my wife ended up moving for fellowship. I spent a few years basically doing locums while she was kind of wrapping up her training. We got through that period of time where it was really interesting. I was, doing a lot of locums work, both hospital-based and office-based. So I had a pretty diverse practice, flying around to a couple different spots, and did that for almost 3 years. And we moved to Missouri, basically. So she works at the University of Missouri. I actually do some work there as well, but my primary job is my own office. So I'm an OBL-based independent physician. Image Guided Solutions in Missouri. We've been up and running for about 4 months now, and it's great.
It's great to hear. And is your OBL your full-time practice now, 100%?
It is, and it's not a Monday through Friday. I'm Monday through Thursday. I take Fridays off to, do a couple things. It's important to have some time for admin, so there's a lot of admin work to be done. Also, in my off time, if you call it my off time, I help run 2 companies related to IR jobs and staffing, Physician Staffing Solutions and Travelier. So we provide opportunities for IR. PSS, as we call it, provides short and intermediate term opportunities. And Travelier, we actually obtain full service IR contracts, and we staff it. For folks interested in those models, at least on the Travelier side, we did a podcast a little over a year ago with Dana Dunleavy and Ian Wilson, so they can check that out. So I work on that. And then one Friday a month, I will actually take call at the university. So adjunct professorship there. So get to work with the residents and fellows there, which is nice. Spend a weekend with them. So still keep in the hospital world a little bit, but pretty much OBL. That's my main gig.
And when Dr. Devulapalli's not busy with all of his other jobs, he's sometimes writing blogs for his Line Monkey MD blog, which I've learned a lot from. And now, Chris Zarour, this is your first time on BackTable. Would you mind giving us a quick introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be here, and it's a privilege, of course, and I'm glad to be able to use this as an outlet to share my experiences. But I did my residency training in the Detroit area in Wayne State Trinity Health in Michigan, and then I did my Interventional Radiology Fellowship at Rush in Chicago with great attendings and mentors to this day, and I reach out to them all the time. And then I came back to Detroit, and I'm working now with a hybrid private practice group based out of Ann Arbor.
And Chris was fantastic to work with when I was an intern rotating through IR at Rush, and he was finishing up his fellowship. So now, to get into the meat of things, let's think back to not that long ago when you were both fellows. What was your experience like first exploring the job market? What were you looking for? What were the type of job offers that you were getting? Chris, we can start with you. You have some fresh perspective as someone who just finished training not that long ago.
So it really honestly matters, depends on the individual. For me, per se, I love the field of radiology, but I also live and breathe interventional radiology. And I wanted to kind of keep my diagnostic radiology skills alive because we all go into a field for a reason. And I feel that having a really strong diagnostic background makes you a really capable interventionalist. But also at the same time, you never know what life may throw at you. And you should always have something to fall back on. So for me, I knew that I wanted to have a position where I could do as much interventional radiology as I possibly could with the same amount of potential to do the same amount of diagnostic radiology, whether I do extra shifts or I have a day shift of diagnostics or in between cases. It just really, it kind of broadens and changes it changes the day-to-day kind of approach of how I look at things, because often in between cases I'll have, and we also have a residency, so that's another thing too. So I have a lot of residents, so they're sending me cases, and I tell them specifically send me the cases that will somehow involve interventional radiology, so that I can go over it with them. We do side-by-side readouts and kind of explain it to them, and then if there's a positive finding, that's typically how I reach out to the ordering provider and tell them what we could offer, whether it's inpatient or outpatient. Oftentimes it's coming from the emergency department, and you'll always see me going down to the emergency department, shaking hands to the ER doctors and tell them, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm an interventional radiologist, there's a positive finding, be more than happy to take care of it if you'd allow me to, and kind of start it there, and it resonates with the residents because they see that, right? And it's not intentional practice building for them, but they see it. So that's kind of how it is. But now kind of the market has changed, right? Because now with the introduction of the whole integrated IR residencies, more and more people want 100% interventional radiology jobs. They're out there. Some of them are sole practices that are just interventional radiologists positions, and then or you can do academic medicine where mostly they're 100% AR or diagnostic positions. But for me, I knew that I wanted a balance of both.
And Dr. Devulapalli, what was your experience like finishing up training, first exploring the job market?
I did it out of fear, to be honest with you, trying to find a job. It was just fear. I got this debt. I got to pay it off. The year's 2018 and the market's not like what it is right now. In fact, I think back to when I was a first-year resident in San Francisco at UCSF. I remember the fellows back then, 2013, 2014. Actually, Aaron Fritz, that's probably just a little bit after he came out. He'd probably tell you the same thing. It was hard to get a job back then. I mean, there was folks doing multiple fellowships. And I was the second to last year before they phased out the old fellowship and brought in the integrated program. But I think my training in many ways was not too different from what it is now. I did a lot of IR during my fourth year residency, a few clinical rotations. So we were kind of headed in that direction. But for me, I needed a job, and I needed it right there in Durham, North Carolina, because my wife was a resident. I didn't want to move. We had just done long distance for 4 years. So for me, I was willing to just eat it and take whatever I can get. So, I didn't cast too wide of a net. I think, back then I knew for sure that I was what you would say pretty intense IR. I still am today, almost militant. People joke about it, but it's true. I love it. I don't love diagnostic radiology. In fact, I knew I wanted to do as much as 100% IR as I could get, but I just didn't exist where I was. So I joined a group that seemed pretty friendly and flexible, that had a lot of interesting pathology, and I was able to do a lot of great work there. But, we can talk about this later in this conversation. But I think for me, I wasn't as nuanced as how you guys are, right? Chris, Subhash, coming out of Rush, clinical model, you kind of know what questions to ask. You kind of know what it's like to build a clinical practice. I didn't necessarily have that. It was just a different time and a different culture. Things have changed a lot in the last 7 years, but that just didn't exist back then. So for me, I kind of knew what I wanted. I didn't really know how to verbalize it, and I didn't know the economic models behind it. So I pretty much did what I could, and I think the rest is history.
So Dr. Devulapalli, you're kind of hinting at it right now, but I'll just go ahead and ask it. What makes a good first job? What are the main factors that you're prioritizing, and what kinds of questions should fellows be asking during these job interviews?
Yeah, I think at Chris's point, it varies and it matters. It depends on, what your personality is and what you're looking for. And I think to really simplify it, and folks may disagree with me on this, hot takes, there'll be a hot take after a hot take. Here goes. There's two types of interventional radiologists. Okay, there's imagers and there's surgeons. Both have good qualities, right? Imaging is important. I'm with Chris. Diagnostic radiology is interesting. It's intellectually satisfying. Folks practice in that model because that's what the market provides. That's 95% of opportunities. Back when I came out, that was like 99% of opportunities. And that model is very different from a surgical model. It's very different from what you guys see at Rush or some other programs that I'd say are more progressive. And those jobs are increasing. Chris is right. There's more folks coming out who want that 100% IR experience. But even the term 100% IR varies. You can be 100% PICC lines and still call it 100% IR, right? And I think to your question, Subhash, what you really got to ask is first figure out what type you are. And if you're of that surgical mindset, you need a clinic. That's it. I mean, everything starts and ends with the clinic. Without a clinic, you're nothing. You're pretty much dependent on whatever comes through the door, at which point, you can do amazing, great cases. You can have things that are really satisfying and fun and adrenaline inducing. You could, thump your chest and post some cool thing on Twitter or whatever, but it doesn't mean you have a practice, right? And, oftentimes those are a lot of academic practices or larger practices in larger hospitals. You could even be rural and be in a larger hospital. I would say at least 400 beds, where you have at least a level 2 trauma designation, maybe a few surgical services. You can do some great work out there. But if you don't have a clinic, you can't really sustain that great work unless you're just kind of dependent on other people. And that's what I learned. And again, if you're maybe more of an imager and maybe you don't necessarily want to go through the work it takes to build a clinical practice, then maybe you don't need that, right? And I think you just got to know who you are. I think for me, people listening to what I'm saying and maybe feel that way, then you got to ask about a clinic. And, then there's nuances with the clinic, right? You talk about what is a clinic? How often do you go to the clinic? Who staffs the clinic? Do you bill for the clinic, right? Where are your referrals coming from? I mean, gosh, I can probably talk for like 6 hours on all that stuff, but you got to really parse that out, and you'll figure out pretty quickly what works and what won't.
And now, Chris, what do you think makes a great first job, and why did you take the job that you're currently in?
That's a great question. I do have to piggyback on Kavi first before I begin that you have to have a clinic. I have set clinic days for that purpose, because before I do any type of endovascular procedure on a patient, I want to see them. I want to make sure that it's indicated. I want to touch, do a physical exam. I want to meet and shake the hand of the patient, let them know who their provider is and who their interventionist is. And I always have a great communication with the referrers and talk, I write the note in the EMR and then call them and let them know that, hey, this is what I think, this is what we're going to do, and this is kind of what the steps are. So absolutely. I mean, that if you want to be an interventionist, you have to have that clinic. That's the whole new clinical of IR, not just the inpatient rounding, but the outpatient stuff as well. So I'm a little different in the sense that I joined the group that ran my residency. I knew that I wanted to stay in Michigan. I always keep my ear to the ground, and I've always talked to everybody about different groups around the area, but I knew the caliber of the group that I joined, and I knew that the individuals that are practicing in the group are some of the best people that now I can call friends and partners. And I think the biggest thing that you have to have is you have to have a support system. And if you want to build something, and you have to be able to have a group of partners that will be willing to help you build, because if you try to build something and there's no support, it's not going to go anywhere.
And just for our audience, Chris, your group is different than a lot of other groups out there in the job market, right? It's a majority IR. Is that correct?
No, it's majority diagnostics, but we have about 8 to 9 interventional radiologists.
And now, Chris, so you kind of touched on some of your practice building techniques already, but 9 months now into your first job, getting some experience under your belt, can you talk about some of the challenges that you've experienced as a brand new attending, and what did you learn from those challenges, or how did you overcome them?
Man, it's been nine months already. I remember rounding in a rush on the last day before we left and doing a Y90 with Dr. Matisari on the very last day. Wow. So I think the biggest challenge is my group, it's a pretty large group. We're about 65 to 70 radiologists, and we cover a vast majority of the Detroit area. So we cover the Trinity Health hospitals, and they're in different parts of the city, not per se in Detroit. They're just outside. We have Ann Arbor, Pontiac, Livonia. They're all within maybe an hour to 45 minutes of each other. And so what I've learned is that each site does things a little bit differently. Where in training, you're used to, for example, one large hospital and all the technologists and all the nurses follow the same protocol. But at some of the sites, it's a little tweaked and a little bit different because the IRs that are there, for example, if we're talking about the interventional realm, some of them are just kind of like stationed there. I'm a little different in the sense that I go to all the sites. And so, and that's something that I like, because I like to be a bridge, and I like to meet different people. I like to connect with different people, and you never know, there may be a chance of practice building in another site as well, and not just to be on one side of the market, for example. But that was a challenge because I had it in my mind that everything is going to be unified and there's a standard protocol, but it's a little different, and it was a little challenging. And the only way that I really got over it was that I recognized it. I spoke to my mentors in the group, and they coached me. That's very important too, is that you want to have as a junior attending, you want to have a mentor, that's somebody there before you coming out of fellowship. You're thinking that, oh yeah, I'm going to take down the world and I can do everything I want, and you're high strung. But you have to understand also that the first 3 years of your practice, I think, resonate the most for the rest of your career. And I never really understood why, but you really want to have that great quality, and not just quality in communication with patients and the staff and your partners, but also quality in the work that you do. Because when you're coming out, just always remember that you have a target on your back, and you want to show that what you do and what you take on, you can accomplish, and that you can provide the best quality for the patient.
And Chris, you said something just now that stuck out to me. You mentioned the first 2-3 years of practice are some of the most important in setting up the rest of your career. For Dr. Devulapalli, I want to ask, when did you know that it was time to leave your first job, and what was that process like? And really, how long should you stick it out in your first job before making that kind of decision?
It's a great question. It was interesting because I wasn't expecting it, to be honest with you, until probably about 6 months into that job, where I realized that I don't think I'm going to be able to do here what I want to do. And I tried changing an environment that didn't want to be changed. And I honestly don't advise people do that. I think the big thing for me was having a clinic. I remember I didn't, I used to beg for space. I would use the radiology manager's desk during lunch. It'd be like a half-eaten sandwich on the desk, and I'd be seeing patients there. I'd go to like an MRI closet with like a dirty mop in the corner, seeing patients. I'd, use random bays in like the surgical pre-op area. I was my own medical assistant, my own nurse, my own biller for E&M. And I think it was just a cultural clash. I don't think they ever saw somebody quite like me. And I think I looked at them and thought they're from Mars. And it just didn't work out. I was getting really frustrated. I think individually dealing with individual IRs was okay. There was another IR there who, to Chris's point, you need a mentor, and he helped me out a lot. I remember getting started doing certain cases that I've never done before. He helped me out with that, and that was good. But I can tell that we were just different. We were just two different beings altogether. I mean, those were imagers and I'm not. So I think for me, I was getting really burned out because I was working really hard after hours trying to support something that just wasn't possible. I mean, I remember I had to read diagnostic imaging. I'd read as much as I could after hours to support what I needed to do. And during the day, I was going full tilt, but I didn't have partners who were interested in that. I was tying up the room for hours on end, doing prostates and ablations and PAD. I was doing a lot of tibial work. I remember when I first stuck a foot, people looked at me like, who is this guy? Like, they were writing complaints about me. Like, why would you do that? Why would you stick a pedal vessel? You guys laugh at it because you guys like do it every day. But that was like a foreign concept for these folks. So it just all kind of went from there, where I ended up meeting a cardiologist on Twitter of all places, now X, who kind of mentored me through PAD. I remember I got really frustrated. I went on SAR Connect and I wrote this big rant. I'm known for writing big rants. I wrote this huge rant, and Bill Julian reached out to me, and Bill's been amazing. He's saved my career. I've said that before. I think listeners should listen to the interview with him and Ali Baheti, I think from a year or two ago. It's really good. But that gave me a good idea of what I wanted to do. And I was basically in that job for just shy of 2 years, I think about 1 year and 8 months or change. And I mean, I did not leave in a great way. I was really upset. But I just basically gave my resignation and said, I'm done. And I think they knew it was coming. So, it was fine. I think what I would tell people is try to avoid that in the first place, right? Understand who you are, know what kind of environment you're getting into, and understand that you can't change that on day one. You can't change that in the first year. To change anything is a 3 to 5 year process, honestly. To build any program in any surgical discipline is a 3 to 5 year process. It requires culture change, and you're just not going to have that ability coming out. I think it's really interesting it's almost egotistical to think that you can do so. I thought I can do it. I was like, I can do these things. Look what I can do. And I realized it wasn't rooted in a practice's economic model. It wasn't rooted in their culture. It wasn't something that was consistent with leadership values. And I think people need to understand what they're getting into. And so, best advice I have is know what you're getting into. Don't do anything crazy. Spend the first 6 months just kind of going with the flow, kind of catching a groove, just being on level with your partners. And then you're going to realize if this is this going to be something that works out or not. And I'd suggest anyone stick it out for at least a year before making a change. You want to leave on good terms. You want people to be able to speak highly of you. You can be open with people, even if it doesn't work out. You can have honest conversations and say this isn't working out, but they can still respect you as a person, and they can still, vouch for you when the time comes. That's important. That was tough. I didn't have that. So I kind of went on a limb and I joined another specialist in a different field, and things were fine from there. But it was some tough stuff. And I don't think I'd had that appropriate mentorship going into it.
So Dr. Devulapalli, you touched on some of your early practice building techniques in the rad tech closet or whatnot. And it really sounded like your first job was total opposite philosophy from yourself. I guess, as early career IRs or people still in training, how much infrastructure should we be looking for then in that first job? Do referral streams already need to be set up, or should we be comfortable at the thought of building up a service line from the ground up? What do you think?
Good question. I think you have to have some infrastructure starting out. I really do. I think otherwise you're going to, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to be on an island by yourself and you're going to suffer the economic consequences of trying to do that on your own, or you're going to try changing people who necessarily don't want to be changed, right? So that's the problem. And I think coming out, if you're surgically minded, this is a big if you are surgically minded, you need to join other people who kind of share your philosophy. I think it's good to be around people who've already created a clinic, who've already done that hard work, who've already planted those seeds. And your role is to fold in, make their life less painful, and for you to introduce new services within that existing infrastructure. That's the best thing you can do. The challenge is those opportunities are few and far between, right? There's not a lot of them, even today, 2025. I mean, look at the job board. It sucks. I mean, you can, don't conflate making money and doing clinical IR. It just doesn't work out. I mean, there's all sorts of great places that'll hire you and pay you a boatload of money, probably like double what I made when I came out even today. But there's just not a lot of opportunities still. I think that's what gets very frustrating for folks who feel this way, who want to be surgically minded. So that then gets into the discussion of building something. And I think you ought to know how to build something. I think when folks are in training, if there's any trainees listening to this, I think you need to learn and figure out, well, how did your predecessors, how did your faculty create that clinic, right? What are the economic arguments for this? What are the codes they're using, right? Like, how are they billing this, right? What's the economic argument? How do you support this? How do you advocate for this? But I don't think it's realistic to do that from day one. And I think what happens if you find yourself where maybe you have to create something, it's going to be a 3 to 5 year process, and you're going to find yourself in the hole financially. So you're going to have to probably do some radiology to support that, to get to that point. It's kind of a hard lesson, but it's the truth.
Now, Chris, in your job, it sounds like you've already been working on building up some service lines, and it kind of goes in line with the practice building that you were doing even as a trainee during residency and during fellowship. So can you talk about what has been your experience practice building, and what service lines are you trying to build up?
Yeah, that's a good question. The term practice building it's pretty interesting because it just depends on what you're interested in, right? And what are you trying to build? Are you trying to reinvent the wheel? Are you doing something that is something that of need for the hospital? It just depends on what you're interested in. So you have to have one first. What thing are you passionate about the most? Maybe pick 1 or 2 things and start slow. If you try to bite off more than you can chew, you're overpromising and under-delivering, and then you're going to start seeing things not coming through so great, right? So when I first started, what I really, really have a passion about is peripheral artery disease. And that's something that I focused on heavily. So in training, we would always double scrub so that I make sure that I'm one of the if not the, and to my capabilities to be the best vascular specialist in my hospital, right? That I can go to toe-to-toe with anybody, right? So that if there's anything, I could offer some help. If not, then I could give some advice, but in those regards. So, but what I've noticed, what works is availability. What I've seen is that people and providers and referrers and patient, everybody, they want to make sure that you are available. And whenever I talk to anybody, I give them my cell phone number, and I tell them, listen, I'm available at any time of the day, whether it's in the middle of the night or on a weekend that I'm not on call. Call me, text me, I'm available. Whether it's about an interventional procedure that I can do, or if it's a diagnostic image or protocoling something, just call me, text me, whatever, I will answer it for you. And most of the time they don't have to do that, but just knowing that they have that availability gives them a lot of comfort. And then the other thing is, like I said, you have to have the support. If you don't have the support, you can't build it, right? It'll just crash. You have to have partners that are willing to support you. I'm very blessed to have all the IRs that I work with are all supportive, including the diagnostic realm. They keep me, definitely they send me all the positive cases like, hey, do you think you can do something here? And I say, yeah, I think I can. And I reach out, and so it's really good.
Sounds like you're doing a great job of building up some cases and referrals coming from the inpatient setting. Do you have clinic infrastructure set up right now at your current practice, or what does that look like?
We're in the midst of renovating one of our departments, our radiology departments in one of our hospitals, which I'm told that we'll have a clinic space. We do have a scheduler. We do have IR nurses, and I'm capable of doing anything that I want in the clinic. So far, from when I started to now, it's been a really great experience. So
it's great to hear.
Maybe I'll add an ultrasound and some other things on there, some examination tables. But I think that's in the new clinic space that they're developing. I think that's going to help.
I guess this is a question for either of you, but you've mentioned the importance of availability, and we always hear different IRs talking about giving out their cell phone numbers to referring providers and also even patients. Can you talk about what has your experience been in terms of being available? Or do these people ever reach out to you, and are you taking these people out to dinner, or are you giving talks or going out into the community? What are some strategies that you guys have been employing or that you did early in your career?
I can start with that. So a lot of dinners, a lot of lunches. Everybody gets my cell phone. I probably have 1,000 different patient contacts on my phone. Been doing this for a little while now, and it's essential. I mean, you are on call 24/7. Even if your office is only open 8 to 5, things happen. Patients need to call you. That's why I don't understand how people are like, I get 14 weeks of vacation, but I do all this IR. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It just doesn't, the math is not mathing. You know what I mean? Like you're on call, patients need you, and referring physicians and offices expect you to be around, and it's just a different world. So, I'll tell you the most recent iteration of this has been my practice, and yeah, there's been multiple dinners, multiple lunches. I joke with my medical assistant, I probably spent like $5,000 in Panera cookies at this point, going around just, giving little gifts to people and letting them know what I can do. I mean, it's wild. You got to. I mean, I don't know how you do it otherwise. I mean, otherwise you're just dependent on things falling in your lap, and that's just a great way to go bankrupt, honestly. So it's essential. You got to be more of a salesman in many ways than you do a physician when you start. And, I joke with the device reps. I tell them I probably do your job, better than you can. And you kind of have to. I mean, you have no choice. You have to market. You have to be aggressive. You have to get in people's faces appropriately. You have to be persistent. It never works the first time. It never works the second time. Usually after the third time, they'll start working with you. After every case that you get, after every clinic visit, you send the note over. Handwritten thank you cards are really nice. Dropping off cookies always helps. After a case, simple text, a little video montage of what you did, going through the case, maybe a little vignette with the patient in recovery saying how they're feeling, or at the follow-up clinic visit, always goes well. I'll tell you, for my spine surgeons, every time I do a kyphoplasty, I let them know how it went. I'll just do a quick little, text. I always print out pictures for the patients off of the C-arm. I give it to them. It's longitudinal clinical follow-up for everybody. I mean, everybody sees me in the office at least 2 weeks after anything I do. So I think it's one of those things where it just becomes ingrained in your culture and your process. And I think the best advice I have for people is, 100% agree with availability. Very important. I think more communication is better than less communication. If you're in a setting where you have a bunch of vacation weeks, be ready to use up some time to communicate with people and maybe market for yourself during that time. And if you don't like doing that, then just don't do this. Just go read images. That's basically it.
I'm gonna chime in real quick. I definitely agree with that, Kavi. I get a good chunk of vacation, but it's not real vacation. Like, I am still talking to referring clinicians, my oncologists, my primary care docs are referring me cases. I'm calling and setting up procedures or clinic days with my scheduler, even on my off days. So, and practice building, going out and meeting these docs. So it's not real vacation, and you're never off on IR if you're an IR. So that's the beauty of what we do. What they say is like, no guts, no glory. So that's my mantra. So I make sure, especially starting off and you're starting to build something, you want to show that you're committed, and you want to show that you can provide the care that they want. Because the worst thing is doing the procedure and then you have no follow-up, and then you expect the ordering doc to just take care of the patient. They hate that. You have to own the patient. You have to see them in the clinic. You have to set all that stuff up. You just have to manage the medications. I mean, that's the beauty of the new clinical IR. So absolutely.
And Chris is not just talking the talk. I can vouch as a fellow, and I've heard stories of Chris even as a junior resident going out into the community and giving talks to PCPs and building those referrals. So he's walking the walk too. So kind of shifting gears here, let's talk about some advice for people who are currently in training. Obviously, hindsight is 20/20, and I can imagine that everyone at some point says, I wish I'd focused more on this thing during training, or maybe I wish I'd asked my mentors more about this particular type of procedure, or practice building technique. So looking back, what are some skills that people like myself, what should we be prioritizing during training, either during the DR years or the IR years?
Okay, I can start. I think we'll kind of split this off into, two, and you cut me off if this gets too long-winded, because I can speak about this forever. But there's the clinical, right? The clinical, I will say clinical and technical, just medicine. Then there's a non-medicine, which is equally as important, that nobody focuses on. So the medicine, I'll start with DR. You just have to be proficient. You have to know your images for your patients. You have to know what kind of studies to look at pertinent to your patients. I think for those of you who are like me and want to build something and maybe understand that it's going to take a little while and you need to support yourself, you need to be good enough to handle emergency radiology is what you need to know. You don't need to know the fine nuances of body MRI and glioblastoma follow-up. Sorry for all the hard workers out there who do that great stuff. But if you're just looking to just do some basic radiology, which is what's expected in the market of an interventional radiologist for radiology settings, you need to know how to do emergency radiology. So that means that means knowing body CT, chest, belly, pelvis, extremity CT, CTA. You got to know basic ultrasound. You got to know, I'd say basic MRI, rule out strokes, right? Spine imaging. Spine imaging is essential anyway for, all these MSK procedures we're doing. But I would say for the DR side, you focus on that. So I think you really prioritize your call experience. I think that's very important. I think if you know how to do that, that's enough DR. That's enough to get you by. You're good. You'll actually be beyond good at that point. Don't get caught up in the weeds. So the next part is IR. Then there's a clinical, there's a technical. Most people get pretty decent at the technical, right? I mean, a lot of people are doing onc, they're doing biliary, they're doing these big things. But the truth of the matter is like 95% of us aren't doing Y90 in practice, right? That's the thing. If you're going to work in a typical community setting that 80 to 90% of us do, you're not going to have a large IO presence. It's just the truth. It's just numbers. So you got to work on common conditions. So the big things, vascular disease, right? That's arterial and venous, chronic venous insufficiency, especially really big, far more common than PAD even. So that's important. Definitely PAD, that's a skill that's very important. And also the clinical management, even more important, how to manage statins, how to manage anticoagulation, antiplatelets. That's very, very important. Knowing basic, cardiology principles, that's very important. Knowing how to manage these patients longitudinally, extremely important. You think about things like chronic pain, extremely common. Back pain, how to work up a basic back pain patient, how to deal with vertebral compression fractures, and not just putting cement in there or spine jacking it or whatever, doing mechanical, but also knowing how to manage the patient, how to work up osteoporosis. DEXA imaging is very important. Knowing the different medications for osteoporosis, what the different options are, knowing your basic labs that you got to draw for these patients, following these patients over time, extremely important. I'd say related to that is going to be back pain in general. So minor interventional pain procedures, ESIs, things of that nature. Sacroiliac joint intervention is definitely very important. We see a lot of SI joint pathology in the community. You want to think about things like women's health. So fibroids, very, very important. How to deal with those patients, not just embolizations, but how to manage them, right? You want to talk about men's health, prostates, not just how to do PAE. You got to know all the alternatives. You got to go to urology clinic and know what they do, right? I think that's super helpful. You got to know how to work the patients up, especially if you decide to go direct to market for a lot of these folks. So I think if you focus on those common conditions and basic imaging, that's going to take care of the medical. Now, with the medical, that's just half the story. The problem is most of us don't get the other half, which is the business. That's so important. If you don't understand the business, you're just going to be, flapping in the breeze and just whatever happens to you, which is not good. That's how most physicians operate. So I think it's critical to get with your faculty and you got to figure out, how do you code these things? How do you build these things? How much money does this section make or does this department make if it's a standalone department, right? How do you justify your presence to administrators? Are there stipends from the hospital? Got to know all these things. I think it's good to understand the different sites of service. What site of service 11? What site of service for the ASC, for HOPD? What is HOPD? People don't even know these things, right? How are device companies incentivized, right? How are they paid? Can you bill back supplies in certain settings? I think it's important to ask all these questions and get a basic fundamental understanding of the economics. How does DR interact with IR, right? Where does the money for IR come from? How does DR make money, right? How does IR make money? I think once you understand these basic things, it's not that hard. If you can make it to medical school and get into an IR training program, this is like third grade math. It's not challenging. It's just that nobody talks about it, right? So you got to know that stuff because once you understand that and you marry the business side of it with the fundamental understanding of the common conditions needed to actually treat the common patient that you're going to encounter most likely to see, you're unstoppable at that point. The problem is people don't get that and they don't know where to start. So I think there's a lot of cultural reasons for that. A lot of that has to do with her radiology upbringing. A lot of it has to do with the fact that academic folks are academic folks. They just don't have to do those things. A lot of them don't. Some of them do. But I think if trainees push and ask for these things, they'll get it. And I think that'll help a lot of academic environments too, because a lot of them are changing and adapting, and some of them do want to become standalone interventional, radiology departments like Rush. So I think there's a lot of folks out there who are well-intentioned. I think it just takes a community in that setting to kind of elevate everyone up.
Wow, what an amazing deep dive into both the clinical aspect and the business aspect of IR. Chris, do you have any pearls to add on to that?
I mean, he hit it right on the nail, right on the nose. I mean, it's there's so much that you don't know, and you're kind of sheltered as a resident and in training, because your main goal is knowing how to be safe, learning the field of radiology, both the diagnostic aspect and then the interventional aspect. But then if you can get some side of the business aspect of radiology, that's always a plus. So the way that I'm just starting out of training, what I did was, I was in a diagnostic radiology residency with an ESIR background. So it was really heavy diagnostics. But what I was always told as a resident from my IR mentors was focus on your diagnostic skills, because that will make you a really good proceduralist and make you an awesome interventionalist, because that's really that what sets us aside from other interventionalists is that we flex on our imaging. We know imaging better than anybody, whether we need another set of modality to help make a diagnosis or for procedure, or even during, or even in the angio suite when we're manipulating the II, we are able to orient ourselves 99% of the time successfully. And knowing the clinical background on things. Whenever I'm on call, I'm never really alone. All my IR partners, we all bounce ideas off, when we're on call, but always fall back on your clinical training, especially at Rush, where we were extremely clinical, right? Probably the most clinical program in the country, with the way Arslan and Turba have made that program. And that's a big, big plus, because you want the hospital to see the presence of IR in the inpatient setting. You want the hospital to see the presence of IR in the outpatient setting. You want the referring people to, the referring clinicians, providers, whomever's sending you patients, to know the presence of IR all around, right? And it's different for us because we really touch every single part of the body. It's not just, oh yeah, we're focusing on the heart, or we're focusing on the spine, or we're focusing on the joints. I mean, we do all of that, right? That's the beauty of what we do. I mean, we have training and everything. We have so many tools in our toolbox to do many different things, and we come up with different stuff. So, knowing that and then kind of having that in your back pocket is good. Now, in terms of the business aspect, go to these dinners that you see, that are hosted by these medical reps for, thrombectomy or the new endoscopy procedures or whatever the case may be. Talk to the reps, get an idea of how much things cost, see how. The way that I did was, I would go to these journal clubs or talk to the reps and kind of see the list of things, because the hospital will negotiate a price differently than another hospital will, and just understanding that is different, and knowing the different insurance coverages. And when you're in training, for example, when I was in training and I was doing a kyphoplasty, I would write the clinic note or the consult note, and then I would personally have to take it upon myself to call the insurance company to do a prior authorization. I would have never known what to do or what to talk about, right, with a peer-to-peer. Like those are things, those are experiences that take the opportunity. Do it. Don't say no to it, right? Because in the real world, you have 5 or 6 years to be an attending, and then you can't get back. You can't go back to that cushion that you had when you're in training. That's it. Everything you do and you say is your last word, because you're in the attending, right? So soak it up. And then don't be afraid to ask your mentors. I call Arslan, Turba, Matisari, Tassi, everybody. I call them all the time. Rauscher, I call them all the time to ask questions and what you think would do here. Or, hey, do you think this is a good idea? And, they always are happy to give you the answer, or to give you an option of what to do, or another procedure, or, hey, maybe this is something that you should stage, for example, right? And go from there. But yeah, the business aspect, I'm still learning. It's so broad, especially with all the things that we do and what we can offer. It's tough, because sometimes the procedure ends up being out of pocket for the patient, and they have to know that. They have to know that.
You guys both mentioned a lot of these business aspects that we usually don't learn during training, and it may vary from program to program. Chris, you mentioned you picked up some tips and tricks from industry, but Dr. Devulapalli, do you have any other advice for resources or mentors, or how do you learn these things if you're not getting them during training?
You learn by doing, unfortunately. So I think for me, it was this, right? So the moment I left the hospital, I had to build a business, right? I don't have diagnostic imaging to pay my bills, right? I'm literally seeing patients, billing consults, and billing for office procedures. So if I don't make that math work, then I'm not in business. So the only way I can do that is by knowing the numbers and making a pro forma for myself. So it all started kind of just having to create an OBL. And from there, it kind of grew. And then it grew into like some hospital work, doing locums, trying to negotiate locums rates, trying to figure out what your quote unquote worth is to the hospital. And, from there, it ended up evolving into me being back in the office, and this time without a partner, with just doing it on my own. So I think, a couple things. I think what trainees can do is they can understand some basics, the types of services they're rendering, both in the clinic and on the procedural side. And they can understand what the CPT codes are for what they're doing. And you can actually go on the CMS website, and we should probably include the link to the physician fee finder. Nobody talks about it, but you can actually put it up. You could punch in the CPT, and you could punch in your location, and you can actually see what the government would pay you for that procedure right then and there. And, that's Medicare. And there's a whole world of commercial insurance that Chris is talking about with prior authorizations and denials. And I mean, that's just terrible. And we all deal with that. It sucks. But that's what Medicare gives you. But Medicare is a benchmark. And unfortunately, that Medicare number for physicians is going down every year. So you have to kind of understand that. But once you do that and you go through a typical day, like let's just say you're on IR service and you did a Y90 and you then did a, whatever, you put in a G tube, you did a bleed, you can get the CPT codes for these things and you should know them. But typically what happens in most hospitals is usually the techs do basic billing, and they'll have check sheets where they'll check off the services rendered. All you got to do is just get your hands on one of those. And you can actually start learning those codes pretty quickly. It'll be like the back of your hand before you know it. And you can understand, you can look them up and kind of see for yourself, oh, this is what I would get paid for that. Right. And I think that's a great first place to start. Once you start doing that a few times, then it becomes routine and you kind of understand how this game works. Now, the second part of this is with devices, like what Chris is talking about, very important. Device reps obviously have incentives to sell. And I mean, we've reached a point in history where some of these reps make more than the physicians using them, honestly. So you understand pretty quickly working with them, you can kind of get a sense of what things cost. And that's very important. If you want to know what things cost in your hospital as a trainee, you can probably ask your radiology manager. They'll tell you. I mean, they're the ones usually actually making those decisions on purchasing, obviously with the input of the attending faculty. But a lot of attending faculty don't really know what things cost. I mean, you'd be shocked. People are routinely using like $1,000 microwires when they could be using like $100 microwire for like a GI bleed or something, probably losing money on the case, honestly. But the key with the hospital really is you can bill back supplies in many, many instances, which is very different from an office where you can't do that. So, there's all these nuances and you learn really quickly. Ballpark what things cost, ballpark what you would get paid for those services. And then you'll see very quickly where you stand on the totem pole that's finances and medicine. And let me tell you, it's not encouraging. So once you realize that, then you'll kind of better understand, okay, this is what I need to do to make this work if I want to practice in this manner. And then what will unfortunately happen to a lot of folks is they might go through that exercise and they might realize, I don't want to practice in that fashion. And they're just imagers and they'll just go read diagnostic imaging. I hate to say it, but that's really where we're at. And I think as a specialty, if we really want to go down this clinical road, then we just got to make it be that and, focus on those folks. But without that kind of discussion and that understanding and going through the motions of looking things up yourself, you're never going to learn. There's no course you can go to. No one's just going to hand you things. Most courses you go to, no offense to the people who make courses, I'm not going to name names, getting one in trouble, but there's financial incentives for those things. The speakers are there because they have services to promote, right? And you pay them, you pay third parties for these services from a declining pot of money every single year. You don't need that. Just look it up yourself. You're smart enough to get here, figure it out. It just takes time, just takes effort. I can point folks in the right direction, but I think that link to the physician fee finder tool will be quite enlightening because most people don't know about that. Those are our tax dollars. Use them.
That's some great advice, and hopefully we can link that website on the description here. So we've had some great discussions this episode. Are there any final pearls or last bit of general advice that either of you want to give to trainees or early career IRs?
The new generation that's graduating, and you're coming out, try not to change the system. Try to go with the flow initially. feel things out, get comfortable. It's a new environment. Understand that you may not have the same multi-specialty support that you've had in these quaternary level 1 massive academic centers where you could do some sort of procedure and then you have backup in case something doesn't go right, right or goes wrong. And then, you're asking another specialty to come help you out. Just know that sometimes in the settings that you will encounter as an attending, you won't have some of that backup. So understand that and kind of feel it out and make friends with different specialties. That's the beauty of what we do, because a lot of patients come through IR more than any other department in the hospital. And I should say almost every single patient comes to the radiology department more than any other department in the hospital, right? With imaging and then for procedures. So know your worth, fall back on your training, and always have your attendings that you've trained with, phone numbers, build relationships, continue to be well, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. I can't believe it's 9 months. It's still hitting me now. I also make a log of all the cases that you've done your first year. I think those are things that you can go back and learn, because you're going to learn a lot from yourself. A lot of the training that you also get is on your own, making that one-on-one decision when you're 2:30 in the morning and just had that really quick cup of coffee because you got called in for a trauma or GI bleed or something like that, and you need to know if you're going to embolize this or not. You're going to have to make that decision on your own. So you're not going to have an attending backing you up like you did in training, right? This is it. So fall back in your training, have as much experience as you possibly can going out, double scrub if you can with all the cases that if time permits when you're in training, and then the rest will work itself out.
I think that's great advice, Chris. I'm not sure I have a whole lot more to add. I think, basically everything you said. Reza Rajabi said this when I did a jobs podcast with him, like in the early days of BackTable. We're talking like 3-4 years ago at this point. And I think what he said is the top 3 most important things to look for are people, and people. and he's right. I think being an IR is frustrating. Be honest with you guys, we're a young specialty. We don't really know who we are yet. We have a lot of disagreements with philosophy, even among IRs, on what to emphasize and how to move as a specialty. I think it'll probably take a few generations for things to shake out. We'd probably be long gone by then. But, I think you got to know what kind of IR you are. And I think, it's not truly binary. There's always overlap. There's surgical types who still want to do imaging and imaging types who want to be kind of surgical. But largely, you got to know your core type. And I think you got to surround yourself with people who share that philosophy. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. And then when you take that and understand that your first job will statistically not be your last job, and it isn't. The vast majority of people leave their first jobs. Gone are the days where people would just park in a place and just stay there for their career. It just doesn't exist anymore. There's just way too much shakeups happening in healthcare with integrations and mergers and private equity acquisitions and all sorts of things we can spend days talking about, that there isn't that level of loyalty to a particular institution or group that there was maybe 20 years ago. It just doesn't exist. So when you couple that with the fact that we are a changing specialty and the way that some of us want to practice surgically will inherently clash culturally, financially, and philosophically with the way things have been done in the past in radiology, will create for somewhat of a chaotic experience for a lot of people. My experience has been insanely chaotic. It's been great, but it's been chaotic. And I think you got to understand that if you want to do something that people aren't doing at scale yet, which is a surgical practice, you have to have a strong backbone training wise. So obviously everything Chris said is important. I think you have to have, at least now, a fallback option, at least a way to like make some money, which is imaging. As much as I hate saying that, it's still true. You do need to know how to do that to some extent. And you got to understand that that first job is just going to be a stepping stone to something else, likely, if that is your path. So if you see yourself out there, someone who's listening to this as someone who's surgically minded, like maybe they want to do something I'm doing now, well, that's great, but just understand that it's not going to be handed to you on day one. And if somebody says they're handing it to you, they're not actually handing it to you. Okay. I would be very skeptical of that. You're probably going to have to do something that you don't necessarily like to get to a place where you want to be. And I think that's probably the biggest hindsight thing that I take away from this. I mean, that first job was essential for me to get to that lab. Well, that lab wasn't perfect, but the business concepts and what I learned with PAD was essential for me to really negotiate and do a lot of locums work. Well, that locums work wasn't perfect, but all that traveling and that exhaustion got me really good at doing everything. Like a lot of things in IR I can do pretty well. Well, that was really important. So now I know the business side, and now I can just plant my flag and say, forget it. I don't need anyone. I'm just going to do this, right? So I think, if that's what you want to do, then great. But you're going to have to take steps to get there. And not everyone's going to be an entrepreneur. Not everyone's going to, build their own lab or create their own hospital contract or something like that. And that's fine. For some people, it is just a job, and that's okay. Doesn't, that's fine. But I think you still got to know those principles. And I think you got to probably create something for yourself if you want to change the specialty and move in that surgical direction. And I think, all those reasons that we talked about for how to get there, I think everything Chris said is very true. I think it's a process. I think it takes 3 to 5 years to build anything, in the grand scheme of things. That first year out of training is just a tiny bit of your career. It's just a start. It's help people to reach out to folks if they need advice. I'm always happy to help. I know Chris would be too. Subhash, you will
Absolutely.
be too soon enough. You're already helping plenty of medical students. So, I think there's a supportive community, and I'm looking forward to seeing great things that people do. I learn as new people come out and do things, right? Chris, when we were talking, you taught me some things. So it's good.
Some great pearls from you both. Thank you once again to our guests, Kavi Devulapalli and Chris Zarour, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. I'm your host, Subhash Gutti. We'll catch you next time on BackTable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and follow, rate the show 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at _BackTable on Instagram, LinkedIn, X, TikTok, or Blue Sky. BackTable is produced and hosted by myself, Aaron Fritz, and co-hosts
Chris Beck,
Sabine Dawn,
Michael Barraza,
and Ali Behetti.
Our production team is led by Kieran Gannon,
Aaron Bowles,
Gabe D'Agrazio,
and Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Social media and PR by Ann Dang,
Manisha Naganathanahali,
and Manbir Singh Sandhu.
Administrative support provided by Judy Dela Cruz.
Thanks again. See you next time.